Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the channel. So today is going to be a little bit of a correction. There was a last minute change to the gear that we sent to AXPONA, the hi-fi show in Chicago. The last video was me going over the system that's going to be in the room there. And the day that the pallets were supposed to be picked up, I changed the speakers that were going to be showing in there. So the micros will still be there, built into that custom box furniture rack. But I swapped out Oh Babies for Gibbon Super 9s. And by way of explaining why, I am going to go on a very circuitous, multi-tangential explanation. So the vast majority of the drivers that we use in DeVore Fidelity speakers, the tweeters, mid-ranges, woofers, are made by a company in Norway called Seas. And I've talked about Seas many times in many videos. They're an awesome company. I have a great relationship with them. They provided the drivers all the way back to the very, very first production models of DeVore Fidelity, so 25 years ago. So the first two models that DeVore Fidelity released as official production speakers were the Gibbon 3 and the Gibbon 8. The Gibbon 8 was a little compact floor-standing two-way speaker using a Seas 6.5-inch woofer and a 3/4-inch textile dome tweeter. That woofer, that 6.5-inch woofer, it was a nice polypropylene cone with a phase plug and a fairly high loss surround, a natural rubber surround. That was my first driver design. That was a custom driver made for us by Seas. And in order to get Seas to make a custom driver for me, I had to order 100 of them. That was an enormous quantity for me back then. And it took over 2 years to sell 50 pairs of Gibbon 8s to use up that first batch of 100 woofers. But we reordered that woofer time and time again. That was the woofer that went on to be in the Gibbon Super 8 as well, and it ended up being the mid-range driver in the Silverback. I since redesigned that, and a very similar version of that original Gibbon 8 woofer lives on to this day as the mid-range in the Gibbon 10. The Gibbon 10 has that same, it's the same cone, phase plug. It's a different basket, slightly modified motor, but it is very, very similar to that very, very first driver design that I made. The tweeter, that textile tweeter from Seas, was an off-the-shelf tweeter. I just used their stock 3/4-inch dome, textile dome tweeter. And that was only one of two off-the-shelf drivers that we've ever used in production models at DeVore Fidelity. And the other one was the woofer from the Gibbon 3, the other original speaker product that we made. The woofer from the Gibbon 3 was a 4-inch, this cute little 4-inch paper cone, and it was made by a Danish company, Vifa. It was part of their premium line. It was like a PL something something something. Beautiful little woofer. And the Gibbon 3 lasted in production for some time as well. That woofer never made it to another model because at some point, so Vifa, interesting. So, all right, here's going to be the first right angle I'm going to take. Vifa in Denmark actually started out as the Danish factory for Seas. So Seas goes back a very long time. Seas in Norway officially became the company Seas in the 40s, the 1940s, and they are absolutely one of the longest running driver makers in the world. One of the oldest. A ton of innovations come from Seas. They are, and I've said this before, they are absolutely the best driver makers in the world. They make the most consistent drivers, fantastic company to deal with. They have the amazing engineers, and they have never let me down with any of my driver designs. So Seas, at some point in the 60s, opened up a Danish subsidiary. So there was a Seas in Denmark as well, starting in the 60s. Sometime at the end of the 70s, in some extremely shady behavior, something went down, and Vifa went from being Seas Denmark to Vifa Denmark, and became a competitor to Seas in Norway. And depending on who you talk to, it was either fully criminal or it was just insanely shady. But so that was the birth of Vifa. Vifa essentially stole all of the manufacturing equipment and the building itself, I suppose, from Seas, and became a separate company right at the end. In 1979. It was a tough time for a lot of driver makers, and in particular Seas. Seas was having a very tough time, partly because of the politics happening there at the time in Norway. But then through the early 80s, they were able to sort of restructure themselves, and I think in the mid 80s they became a company that was owned by the employees. So the employees actually all became shareholders in the company, and they continued on in that way ever since. Vifa had rather a different trajectory. Vifa got embroiled in a lot of the political and corporate infighting in the Danish driver manufacturers, and at various points owned Scanspeak. Scanspeak was a company started by this guy Scanning, who then went on to found Dyn Audio, and then on to found another company that was originally called Scanning that made these sort of flex units. But yeah, Scanning sort of bounced around quite a bit. So Vifa owned Scanspeak for a while, and then in I think around 2008, the whole bunch was purchased by a big Chinese company called Timpani. Timpani purchased Peerless, Vifa, and Scanspeak, all Danish driver manufacturers. And I think they owned a couple of other companies as well. So immediately, Vifa and Peerless were moved to Chinese production, and at least temporarily, Scanspeak was allowed to remain in production in Denmark. This affected me enormously, because all of the sudden, all of those beautiful Danish-built woofers that I was using in the Gibbon 3 were not available anymore, and they were retooling to make them in China, and they sent me a number of samples and prototypes, and it was clear that they were not going to be able to make the same driver to the same level that Vifa was making in Denmark. So I had to immediately stop production on the Gibbon 3. At some point, a year or so after, Scanspeak was then sort of spit back out and became a Danish company again, no longer owned by Timpani in China, and they offered to make that driver again for me, but it was going to cost something like 5 times the price. And at that point, there was no way I was going to be able to keep the Gibbon 3 in production without an enormous price increase. And so at that point, I moved over to using a Seos woofer, increased the size of the Gibbon 3 and made the Gibbon 3 XL. And that replaced our smallest little stand mount. So fast forward a number of years. So if this was 2008, 2009, let's fast forward 7 years. I am in the design process for the O reference. I'm going to make a whole video on just the O reference and the design process of the O reference. But essentially, the O reference is sort of an enhanced two-way speaker. So 99% of it is a two-way, but it's enhanced in that the spectrum is broadened without changing the nature of it being a two-way. And so the bass machine takes over the octave below, so from 30 hertz to 15 hertz is handled by the bass machines, dedicated subwoofers in that system. And then the octave above 20K is taken over with a little super tweeter. And that super tweeter was designed around parts from Vifa, from an original Vifa little 3/4 inch textile dome. But at this point, it's Vifa Timpani, Vifa China. And so this is one of the very early prototypes of the O reference super tweeter. It's a little 3/4 inch textile dome mounted on a little mounted on that bronze, and the basic parts, the molded parts here. So there's this plastic cap here. This plastic part encloses the chamber, the rear chamber, where the resonance is tuned in there. And then the other part of this is what actually holds the neodymium magnet in place, and it's what the dome and the surround and the coil mount into from the front. So it's my tweeter design, but designed into a Timpani piece there. So I ordered, in order to get Timpani, so Timpani is a company that is far more used to building drivers for like premium automotive. They're much more of an industrial supplier, and they're used to taking an order for 500,000 tweeters to be used in XYZ Cadillac model. In order for me to even get their attention to make a custom driver, I needed to order 1,000 of them. And so in 2018, I ordered 1,000 of these little units to be built into the OREF super tweeter. And I've explained this also at some point in a couple of different videos, maybe not in this channel. So I'm just going to I'll do a quick version of it. So I had 1,000 of these. Obviously, I'm never going to sell 500 O-reference systems. So I knew that I had hundreds of surplus dome, coil, motor, and chamber assemblies. These sort of like half tweeters. So when I became interested in designing the O babies and the micros, I knew that one way to be able to save a lot of development cost and also a lot of production cost would be to incorporate those units into the design. And so I designed a new horn for that little unit. And so instead of this, this is not really a horn. This is a faceplate that time aligns this tweeter with the actual horn-loaded main tweeter of the O reference. And so this is sort of set back. In the O reference, this unit is crossed over above 21 kilohertz. So this covers from 21K to 48K, I think, is where it actually starts to roll off. A horn for those frequencies would be really tiny. So this is not a horn. The what's coming off of this tweeter is really coming straight out. But in order to make this into a normal tweeter that would cross over into where the range where that 7-inch woofer is running, I needed to design a horn, a horn that would actually work and that would augment and reinforce the lower frequencies of that super tweeter and turn it into a regular tweeter. And so I did that, and we figured out a way to mount that little tweeter mechanism to the rear of the baffles on the O babies and micros, and that became the tweeter for the O babies and micros. And that was introduced a couple of years ago, and it's been selling well. And it became time recently to order more of those tweeters from Timpani. So I reached out to my supplier, who said that Timpani had reorganized all of their pricing and didn't have the same sort of quantity discount tiers and didn't have the same kind of OEM pricing or anything like that, and suggested and sent me their contact with Timpani in China. So I reached out to Timpani in China with all of the original driver parameters and all the spec sheets from that original super tweeter that I bought. And they informed me that they are not making those parts anymore. So all the molded parts, so this back chamber and all of the parts that mount to the front of that locate the coil and the magnet and the motor and the dome and everything, they're not making those anymore. They're re-engineering that, and there's going to be new versions coming out in late 2025. And that all the versions that they were going to be building on that were going to be 4-ohm units. 4-ohm is the industry standard for automotive use and for a lot of self-powered things. So anything that's going to be powered by a Class D switching amplifier, generally those are also going to be 4 ohms. All of those types of amplifiers are all designed around a 4 ohm habitat. So, high-end sound bars or Bluetooth speakers, all of those kinds of things, those all require 4 ohm tweeters, 4 ohm drivers in general. That was their roadmap moving forward. We're going to be sort of 4 ohm versions of this new architecture. And so I start panicking that they're not going to be able to make my version of my tweeter in this new architecture. I finally reached this dude, Ryan, in California, who is I guess he's sort of one of the U.S. liaison for the Chinese company. And he contacts me, and we have a great phone conversation. And he tells me that they're pretty sure that they are going to be able to make my 8-ohm version in the new molded parts. I'm actually going to run, I think he's coming to AXPONA in Chicago. So I look forward to meeting him there. So in the meantime, the soonest that this is going to happen, the soonest that they're going to be able to send me prototypes of my little tweeter built on the new chassis is going to be multiple months. And with a little luck, it'll be before the end of the year. So what this means, long story not so short, is that circling back to the Oh Baby and why it came off of the pallet of speakers shipping to Expona in the first place, is that I have to stop production of all Oh Babies and micros until we can get this tweeter situation fully solved. I don't want to just keep making them and completely run out of my inventory of existing tweeters, because first of all, I need to keep those on hand for any service, any warranty or non-warranty service for the existing Oh Babies that are already sold out there, and I need to hang on to it for making our 1 or 2 or 3 sets of O references that we make every year. And so it made no sense whatsoever to show 2 pairs of speakers that I cannot ship until some unknown date in the future. So that's where that stands. It is the difficulty of being a tiny manufacturer in a much larger consumer electronics world But that is who we are, and that's where we are, and those are sort of the perils of dealing with companies other than Seos. And I'll just say it again. Seos has been awesome, amazing all the way through this whole 25 years. They have stood behind all of their products. They have made it easy for me to order smaller quantities. So we went from ordering 100 at a time to 150 at a time to 250 at a time to most recently we order 400 at a time of the custom woofers that they make for us for the babies and micros. But they're also flexible enough to sell us 50 at a time of those incredibly expensive and very, very elaborate reference 10-inch woofers. Thank you so much, Seos, and I will continue to use you for everything that I possibly can. And thank you, Tiffany, for even paying attention to a tiny company like me and wanting to do things that are very much outside of your normal production method. So thank you. Again, I look forward, Ryan, to meeting you in Chicago. I also very much look forward to meeting any of you viewers, subscribers, customers. Any of you are going to be in Chicago, come by. We're going to be in room 646. So come by, say hi. I will be there, as will Anthony from Box Furniture. Yeah, definitely come by, say hi. Thank you for watching. This is a very long-winded way of explaining why we have swapped speakers at the last minute. Thank you for watching. I will see you at the next video, if not before in Chicago.